Broadcasting on the internet airwaves from the great state of Minnesota, my name is Shaun and you're listening to The Shaun Tabatt Show. Today, my special guest is Ryan Hanley, and we'll be discussing his book, Content Warfare: How to Find Your Audience, Tell Your Story, and Win the Battle for Attention Online. Ryan, thanks for being a part of today's show.
Oh, Shaun, I'm so happy to be here, man.
Well, first off, let's help the audience get to know you a little better. In the book, you talk about working at American Express at one point in your career and also selling insurance before beginning your journey into content warfare. Give us some insight into how this journey got started.
It's a story that's probably been told by a lot of different people that end up kind of having an entrepreneurial mindset. And it's that I grew up thinking, I grew up in a relatively low income setting. And it was kind of my parents' belief that the only way to get out of that was to get into, go get the college degree and get into the big corporate setting, and then you'll be all set, right? That was kind of their mentality because they were both very much blue collar workers. And I did that. And I worked for a company called RSM McGladrey in Washington, D.C. for 5 years, a very large international accounting firm. That was a great experience. And then I worked for American Express in New York City down in the financial district for almost a little under 2 years. And both were very good companies, but I always felt unsatisfied. And actually, I think it used to drive, then she was my girlfriend, now she's my wife. I used to drive her crazy because she said, you have these great jobs and great opportunities. How come you feel unsatisfied? You need to find what you're good at or find what you love to do. And we both, even though we kind of met after college, we both actually grew up in the same town in upstate New York in Albany. So we actually didn't know each other in high school, and then just serendipity or circumstance or whatever, we ended up being from the same area. And when we decided to move back, her father owns an insurance agency and kind of made me an offer I couldn't refuse. So I became a boots on the ground insurance salesman, going door to door, knocking on businesses, dropping off my business card, trying to sell. And that got me a step closer, but I still wasn't satisfied with that. And that's kind of where I started doing my own, this content thing. Started figuring out how to become a creator. And that's really the genesis of the whole thing. I mean, there's lots more in there, but I'm not sure how far you want me to go.
Well, and I think that's a good lead into the next question. So fast forward a few years, you have a successful book, you've got a successful blog and a podcast, and you speak at different conferences and events. And thinking of my listeners, I know some folks will look at that and the various facets of the work you do, and they're like, oh man, I could never do that. But I'm willing to bet that those things came together in stages over a period of time. So help us understand kind of the timeline and evolution of your work as you began producing multiple types of content.
Oh my gosh. So what I would say to anyone who feels overwhelmed by what you just read is I would say that none of that came together in any period of time that someone could sell you a course for, right? There's no like 7 steps to a best-selling book at the end of the month thing that actually gets you to that place. I mean, this has been a labor of love for me. So kind of the next step in the story is I was getting slaughtered selling insurance. It just wasn't working for me. I was trying really hard. I was trying to put the effort in. But when you've been in the business for 5 months and you're going against people who've been in the business for 15, 20, 30 years, I mean, you'd have to be silly as a business owner to choose the person who's been in business for 5 months. And this was happening over and over. So I was looking for ways to differentiate myself. And I started on LinkedIn around 2008, 2009. So LinkedIn was still very young as well. But I realized something very early on, and that's that creators were winning attention. The creators are the ones that win. The people who were putting something out into the world were the ones that were attracting the most attention. And it just clicked over for me that if I was talking about my insurance work online, I wasn't the 26-year-old kid who only had 5 months experience. I was the insurance professional with expertise who was willing to share that for free with the public. So my RyanHanley.com, which is now my website and my blog and where my podcast is, and is really my home base for everything that I do on the content marketing side, started as an insurance blog titled The Albany Insurance Professional. And as I learned a new insurance coverage, I wrote about it. And what happened is after doing that for about 3 years and really that being a catalyst to having some success and starting to grow a book of business, we transitioned the insurance work over to our insurance agency's blog. And I started writing about marketing and started sharing some of the tactics and strategies and ideas that made RyanHanley.com, the insurance blog, successful. I started sharing those with people. I mean, we're talking 5-6 years now I've been doing this. Podcasting it'll be 3 years in August. The book took me, really 3 years to write, 13 months of really intensive writing and speaking. It's been, I started out speaking for free to 7 people locally 5 years ago. Yesterday I was in front of an audience of 400 people in Wisconsin. So it takes a long time to get to these places. It just doesn't happen overnight. But if you put in the work and you really know what you want, I want to be a writer and a speaker. I love it. You get there.
Well, that's one of the things I really appreciate about your story. There are a lot of books about social media marketing and having success online. And, they have some interesting, useful, actionable data, but often they're presented in a way where it does seem like that particular individual had just immediate overnight success. And there isn't always honesty about the years of painful labor that sometimes go into building an audience and making these things happen. So one of the things I really appreciate in our talk today and in your book is you're just very transparent about what really happened behind the scenes.
I think that that's a great point, because I don't want to say that there is dishonesty, because that's not really what it is. But I think that in order to make the story sexier, a lot of times people who write books on this topic or create content around it will gloss over all the hard work. So they're either glossing over it to make it a little sexier, because it is. If someone can tell you, like, here's the 7 things that if you do tomorrow, you'll be a world-class blogger, that's really sexy. If I were to write a post that said, here are the 7 things that you're going to do over the next 7 years that will make you a world-class blogger, you're kind of like, I don't want to wait 7 years for that. So I definitely have committed myself to trying to be transparent about this kind of stuff. The other side is, I don't mean to sound negative about this in any way, but there are some people who create in this space who haven't actually done the work. I'd like to think that one of the defining characteristics of what I try to help people with is that this is really how I fed my family for a while. We had days where, I wasn't making a ton of money. It wasn't always, 6-figure product launches and stuff, all these things that you read about. Like, it wasn't always that way. For a long time, it was just grinding through and learning how to do the work and figuring out what my voice was and how to connect with an audience and how to write a headline and what does a good social media share look like versus something that no one clicks on. I mean, these are all things that truly you can educate yourselves on them. But what I tried to do in the book was give people the path to figure it out for themselves.
And speaking of the book, I think another interesting part of the story behind content warfare is that there's a crowdfunding campaign that was involved in that whole project. And now this is something I'm seeing more and more. I have different friends who work in the Christian music industry, film industry, and obviously my full-time gig, I work in the publishing industry, so I deal with a lot of authors. But I'm still seeing more and more of my friends, even who are published by, legit publishing houses and on, traditional music labels, that sort of thing. They're actually pursuing crowdfunding for a lot of their projects, and it's exciting to see them bring all this fan support about something that they're really passionate about. Tell us how that works into the whole journey for content warfare.
So content warfare, I said it took me about 3 years, but about 13 months of intense work. So I had been writing this book for a while. I would test ideas in blog posts, and then I would write them out into longer chapters or longer ideas, and I would put them in a file, and it just wasn't coming together. And I have a good friend by the name of Tom Morkis, who is a soon-to-be self-published author as well. And he introduced me to a guy by the name of Guy Vincent, who runs the Publishizer platform, which is a crowdfunding platform for authors. And what Guy did was he basically walked me through what crowdfunding is, because it seemed really scary to me. I had considered the concept because I had always said with content warfare, I wanted this to be the most professionally done self-published book that I could possibly create, right? I didn't want to just throw a create space up there with like a $5 cover and call myself an author. Like, I wanted to go through the whole process. I just wanted to own it myself. And I wanted to make the decisions, and I wanted to have final say on everything. So I didn't even consider traditional publishing. Not that I wouldn't as a second run if that were ever possible, but as a first run, I wanted full ownership of the book. And he basically took kind of the scary out of crowdfunding for me. And his platform made it very easy, very straightforward. And there are a lot of pitfalls and a lot of things that people don't tell you about crowdfunding. Firstly, the amount of stress and responsibility that comes with collecting money for something that you haven't actually finished creating yet. That being said, you're able to activate your audience and validate your idea in a way that there are very few other processes that will allow you to do that. I mean, if your crowdfunding campaign isn't successful, then you might want to question the way you're positioning your product or the audience that you're seeking for it. It gives you true validation on whether your idea is legit or not.
Well, and I think one of the cool things is you really see how much your audience is actually behind you, because they're willing to put up money for a product that doesn't exist. So if you can get people to do that, I think you might be doing something right.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, at the time we had the fastest, we raised just under $11,000 in 21 days, which for a $10,000 goal, which meaning if I didn't hit $10,000 in crowdfunding contributions, I wouldn't get $1. So for a $10,000 goal, we set the record for fastest to be completed, which was really, amazing and humbling. And like I said, then stress inducing, because now I had to actually make good on my promise to get the book done, which obviously I would, but you just feel a little bit of a weight on your back when now it's like completed and you're like, oh my gosh, I actually have to figure out how to get this to people now.
So we've covered a bit of the backstory, but now let's do what you might call a bit of a shallow dive into some of the content you cover in the book. And what I'm really looking for here, and we'll go kind of through the book section by section, but either a high-level overview or what I think is even sometimes more helpful, a story that's going to illustrate to the listeners, what they might, or an example of what they're going to encounter in that particular section of the book. So to start us off, part 1 of the book is called How to Find Your Audience. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so one of the major concepts in content warfare that's different, I think, from a lot of other content marketing books is the very first focus that we put on you, the person reading, is that before you start telling your story, which I kind of will, in the next part, we'll talk about what that actually means. But before you start telling your story, before you start delivering your message to an audience, you actually have to figure out who that audience is and start to build it. And there are a lot of different ways to do that. So these things kind of happen synchronously, but the main focus is that I could never have successfully crowdfunded my book if I hadn't spent 5 years building that audience first. Right? If I just said, I'm going to write a book and I had never engaged with people and delivered value and been part of their lives in some small way, either by speaking or podcasting or answering a question if they emailed me, then the actual delivery of my thing would never have taken place. So the very first part of the book is actually helping people dive into who they are, who their business is, and who they're looking to connect with, and figuring out ways to find them so that when you're ready to tell your story, when you're ready to take your message, you know where those people are, and you're not just putting it out into the world where it'll never be found.
Well, I think that's one of the challenges people face when they're starting on the journey to find the audience is, one, they don't have an audience when they start, so it can be kind of disheartening. But over time, when you pull that audience together, you really can accomplish some interesting things. Like, for instance, I just relaunched this show after taking a several-month break as I got onboarded at a new job that I'm at. But relaunching a podcast with an audience I'd built over the course of a couple years was a lot easier than the first time, when you're starting out and that audience doesn't exist. So in the case of your crowdfunding campaign and the other things you do, once you've built that audience and you're doing things that are on topic, they're going to be there to support you.
Yes. And, one of the core principles in the book is I take the idea of Kevin Kelly's true fan, and we pulled that thought, that true fan idea through the whole book, because that's really what we're hoping to get. There are a lot of different layers of attention and connections and that kind of stuff. But the people that grow your business, the real value in an audience is that core group who doesn't just read your blog post, but they share it without thinking. They add a link to whatever you're doing in their email newsletter without you asking. They give you feedback on things that other people may either not be willing to take the time to give you feedback on, or maybe are uncomfortable giving you feedback on. It's that true fan group, and the how large your true fan group is really how your message scales, especially when you're kind of an author or a creative and you're working, in your own space. Like if you have an entire team, it may be a little easier to scale, but especially when you're working with yourself or maybe a virtual assistant or something, the only way your message really scales and hits that mass market is if you've really dialed into and built that core audience of true fans, because they're the ones that are going to make the success happen.
Well, and I find with a lot of the work I do, it's that 20%, the true fans of, that 20% part of my whole fan base who consistently, every time I share anything, do anything, they're the ones who are telling people about it. And, that other 80%, they might do that from time to time, but there's that really dedicated group of people that loves your content, they love your message, and they're just going to go out and support you every day.
Yeah, it's funny. So I spent almost the entire year of 2014 diving into and building an audience on Google+, right? I really liked a lot about the platform. Whether you like it or not, it isn't really the matter. And this isn't a pitch for Google+. It was more of, I wanted to see if I gave myself completely to one social network and made that my thing, if I could build, it was almost like a little experiment. And it's fantastic, a fantastic platform. It does have its drawbacks, without a doubt, but it's fantastic at the same time. So on that platform, I once wrote an article which basically said that when one of my buddies, Wade Harmon, who writes about relationship marketing, and he does very, very good work, that there are times when I don't even look at what his post is about. I just reshare it to my audience because I know, one, that he does incredibly high quality work, and two, that my audience 99 out of 100 times will enjoy, appreciate, and find value in whatever he's writing about. I've become a fan of his work. He is of mine. And we all probably have 5 or 6 people, or maybe more, where you don't even need to read the article every time to make it worthwhile pushing it on. One, because you want to support them, but also because you know that your community should be exposed to their work. I am a true fan of his. And that really is the value of having that, is that I'm going to reshare his stuff when I see it simply because it's him and I know how good he is. The more people we can develop like that underneath our content, the more people that we can bring into that level where they're not even necessarily, not that we don't want people reading our stuff, but that they're willing to, when they don't have time, just reshare your article because it's you and because they respect your work. That's really where the magic starts to happen.
All right, well, let's transition now into the second part of the book, which is called Tell Your Story. What does that look like?
So telling your story is really just, we get into a lot of the core principles of content marketing. And for business purposes, we break out, what does a story really mean? So there's a lot of pieces in here. This is probably one of the more tactical sections of the book. A lot of the book is not tactical on purpose. I would have somebody punch me in the face if I ever wrote, like, you should be on Facebook 3 posts a day, right? And they should be spread out 3 hours. I mean, that's like not what I wanted to write about. The one thing that I want to describe to people is, when we say story, we're not talking about like Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones. What we're talking about is 3 concentric circles or buckets of content that, where they intersect, make up the story of your business or your brand. It's what people get. It's the emotional connection that they make with you. And those 3 buckets are company, client, and community. And to get a real feel for them, you probably have to read the book, because it would take me hours to, take me about 35 minutes, like I just did in my presentation yesterday, to describe the whole process. But basically, you want to talk about who you are as a company and why do you show up every day? Who are the people that do business with you? What do they look like? Why did they choose you? And what is the community that you serve? That can be an online community. It can be a local community. It can be a extremely niche or a very general community. But what does it look like? Where do you hang out? Where do the people who you do business hang out with? And when you focus on those 3 buckets, notice I didn't talk about what you actually do as a business, right? That content is important, but it's more the barrier to entry. What truly separates you and gives you a story is not your product or its features or benefits. It's these 3 buckets of content: your company, your client, and your community.
All right, well, now let's transition into part 3, winning the battle for attention online. I'm assuming there we're going to maybe talk about some of the different types of content that we might be creating for our audience.
Yeah, and just what attention means, why it's valuable, and what truly separates us. So we get into a little bit more. I do a little bit of deep diving in certain places to give people examples. We talk a little bit about Google Plus in this section, mostly from the standpoint of, here's what I did on the Google Plus platform to build in the course of 1 year, an audience of 13,000 people. 50% of the crowdfunding campaign contributions came from people that I originally met inside the Google Plus platform. And the whole concept is, I did this here. Here's how I built this audience, but really it has nothing to do with Google Plus. It's more agnostic of platform. It's just using it in context of Google Plus, because that's where I did the work that year. Those ideas completely transcend to any platform. So the point of Win the Battle for Attention Online is where we start to talk about the actual specific forms of content and places and how they apply, and how really I think people tend to get lost in platform and tactic. And it's really more these core principles that transcend both. And what are the real reasons that people give you their attention? And we dive into that, because that's really the deal, right? Whether you're podcasting or writing or doing video or creating images or art or Instagram or Vine or whatever your platform is to create whatever it is that you create, there are core principles to gaining attention and building an audience that transcend. And then you just fit in the tactics and strategies and whatever based on what that platform is.
All right. Well, thanks for giving us some insight in how we can be winning the battle for attention online. Now, the last part of the book is called Permission to Start, and I think that's really one of the most important things that people need to overcome when they're starting something new, entering into the unknown, where they might want to be a writer, they might want to be a podcaster, they might want to be an entrepreneur, and they set these really high boundaries that, they're not willing to embrace that identity, call themselves that until they've achieved A, B, C, and D. How do people need to give themselves permission to start way before they get to that point and have already achieved some success?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, this is actually a section of the book. It was the very last section that I added, and that would make sense because it's at the end, but really I wrote this book all over the place, and many of the authors listening probably can relate to that. It's not really a linear process when you're putting these things together for the most part. But this section I went back and forth on, and finally I decided I had to add it. And to be honest with you, if someone said, I can only read one section of the entire book, what would it be? I would probably say, read the last section. Read the Permission to Start section of this book, because even though you're not going to learn anything about content marketing in its traditional form, I think this is the piece that hangs the most people up. Right? They have this great idea, or they have something that just burns in their brain every day because they're not doing it, and they never start, or they start, but they never give it its full opportunity or full chance to be successful. What I go into in this section is really like we build throughout the book this process and this mindset and these core ideas that you can take with you in any of your endeavors. And I feel like Permission to Start is like the big red button at the end, and you just slam it down, and now it's time to go. I was kind of up in the air because it's different kind of in tone from maybe the rest of the book, but I do think that it may be the most important section to someone in ultimately being successful.
I think Ryan and I would give all of you permission to start whatever it is you're looking to pursue, whether it's writing, podcasting, music. You got to start somewhere, and, embrace that identity right away. I think for me, getting into podcasting, it took a while because, I felt like I had to learn everything and become this expert. And to some extent, you just got to jump in and learn as you go. So give yourself permission to start, and start today. That's my advice. Another question I had for you in relation to the book, I think based on our conversation, people might be going, well, content warfare, is this a book that's really geared towards the creative or the entrepreneur or the solopreneur? I work for a traditional company and that sort of thing. Is this book going to be for me too? So who is this book for? On the one hand, who did you have in mind as you were writing it? But really, how could this apply to the entrepreneur and both the guy or gal who's working at a traditional business?
I'll tell you, it's funny. I've had this question asked to me a couple of times, and most people, when they ask it, they usually put, it seems like it's geared towards entrepreneurs. Is it for traditional people who maybe work in a more traditional company or inside a company or aren't the business owner? And I'll tell you, when I was writing it more for that person who's sitting at their desk in a company thinking to themselves, man, I would love to do this, or I would love to add this aspect to our business, but I'm not sure how to do it, or I don't know if I can, or if it'll be successful. And they're questioning whether they want to take that next step. I think it works for entrepreneurs and solopreneurs and certainly for small businesses. But when I was writing this book, I was thinking about myself sitting in the 22nd floor of American Express down in the financial district of New York City, thinking to myself, like, there is something missing in this job for me. And I have a feeling that it's creating, but I don't know where to start, how to do it, what it looks like, and who else has ever done this? Like, do people do this? And and this is also probably 8 or 9 years ago, 10 years ago at this point. So it's not like today where kind of the internet is so widespread. And I was thinking back to that time going, I know there are people still sitting in offices who want to take it to the next level or add that part to their life. So I think that those are the people who probably find the most benefit from this. Though I think it works across the scale for anyone who wants to be creative, and will find something and take something from this. I would like to think that it blends creativity with making creativity successful also in business, right? It's not just creativity's sake. There are other books for that. This is more of how do you take that creative itch that you have and scratch it in a business format.
Well, I think whether you're an entrepreneur or somebody who's got a podcast or a blog, or you're just somebody who's going to work every day, in the workplace today, in the midst of our career journey between LinkedIn and other things we're doing online, part of it is, each of us has to best represent ourselves online. I'm amazed at how important social media and presence online can be in the midst of job interviews. I worked for a couple of software companies and have done a heck of a lot of recruiting through the years. And so, I would do a lot of research on people online when we were thinking about hiring them. And so, I think in some extent, somebody who's just, doing a traditional career track could apply a lot of these same principles to just building a presence online for themselves professionally, just like somebody who's got a creative piece that they're trying to get out. So it really could apply to anybody.
Yeah. And, I'd say if you're inside an organization and you just want to have that personal branded presence in case something happened or in case you were looking for another opportunity, you could apply absolutely everything you read in this book to like LinkedIn Publisher, where you're just talking about your expertise and building up a little bit of a personal brand in this space in a very safe and kind of professional environment. And there's a lot of ways that you can use this process. I tried to make it as agnostic of platform or medium as possible because, one, I believe that the concepts transcend, and that two, if you understand the concepts, tactics, strategies, platform, medium, they all become very easy questions to answer once you understand the core principles.
Well, in the week leading up to our interview, I talked to a number of my friends. They're all published authors, and asked them if they could talk to a social media expert, what kind of questions would they ask? So let's take a look at a few of their questions. First up is my friend Rod Tucker, and his question is, how can I let the world know that my content is different and impacting when there's so much new media out there? And some of the examples he gave were blogs, YouTube videos, podcasts, etc.
I think the answer to that is that you have to let them know. You have to tell them and be present in that space, right? There's many different tactics that you could take here. So if I'm a published author and I don't want to have a blog, right? Maybe I create, I go on to MailChimp and I create a simple page for people to get on a newsletter. And once a month, I use my distinct style and expertise to tell short stories that you can only get if you're subscribed to my newsletter. And then you can use the various methods for capturing people to do that. So if you're on a podcast tour or you're in person or whatever, let people subscribe to your newsletter, and then you show them that you're different by proving it to them once a month in a little 1,500 word snippet that they're like, wow, I this every month I get these great little novella is probably the wrong word, but little snippets of thought, and I really love the way this guy thinks. I got to go get his book, like I have to. And then you create ways for that to be self-perpetuating. So there's lots of different things that you can do there, but if you don't want to make your work public because you want to own that, then I think maybe like an email newsletter would be a great way to kind of keep it behind a wall of sorts. I mean, obviously you still could get out there, but I think that's a great way to go about it.
Our next question comes from Sue Detweiler, and I might think of this in the context of, most of these authors have a traditional 9-to-5 job. So they're not just writing solely to make a living. It's one of the ways they make a living, but not all that they're doing. So a lot of these people already have some presence online. But Sue's question is, what is the best way to go about building an online community? And I would say in the terms of somebody who's already dabbling in the space, but hasn't maybe found a sweet spot just yet.
Gotcha. So what I would say to Sue is pick just one thing, right? So I talked about the newsletter. That could be your thing. You could have Facebook be your thing, or Twitter, or whatever platform you felt that you did your best work on, right? So think about that. What platform do you do your best work on? Pick just one and let people know that that's the place that they can connect with you deeper. I think when trying to build an online community, we think of an online community as all the platforms, and that can become overwhelming and can thin us out a little bit. And if our true goal in building an online community is to deliver as much value as we possibly can to the people who would become our true fans, then we want to make sure that we're focused in our efforts. So if Sue does have a traditional 9-to-5 and writes on the side and wants to build an online community, then my recommendation to her would be maybe create, and I'm just kind of talking here, spitballing. I have no idea what she ultimately wants to do, but she could create a private Facebook group and let people know that, like, if you want the inside baseball on, I don't know if she writes fiction or nonfiction, but on whatever her topic is, to come to this group, and where maybe she talks about her writing process or characters or story development or research development or whatever it is that her true fans really want to know about. Just pick that one place and let them know that if you really want to take the deep dive, this is where you should come. That way she can do her best work because she only has to worry about one platform, and her audience is very clear on the place that if they want that deeper relationship, they know exactly where to go.
All right, and our next question comes from Sunday Joe Graham, and she says, if you could only focus on one social media platform, which do you recommend? And I personally get this question a lot from a lot of authors. My typical answer is, if you're going to pick one, I would probably choose Facebook or Twitter if you're just getting started. You may say Google Plus based on our conversation, and I would normally say, pick one or two and do it well. But how do you answer this question when people ask it?
Snapchat? No, I'm just joking. No, maybe. I don't know. I would say that if I had to give a broad sweeping answer, I would say Facebook, only because you have the ability to create these private groups or groups that you can make public or semi-private. You figure out where you want. So you can take people deeper if you want. And Facebook private groups is probably the best feature of Facebook. But you have the most people there, and you can create some quasi long form. And I really like Facebook native video. I think that you can really connect with people on a personal level, especially an author who a lot of times is this blank face behind a page. If you wanted to come out from behind that and do simple 30-second to 45-second videos where you talk about things that are going on or updates in the story, it's very easy to deliver that message. But the real answer is, where do you do your best work? If you're not funny, spending a lot of time on Twitter is probably a waste of your time, right? So unless your writing career is about breaking news, you're either funny, a super celebrity, or you break news. And if you don't do one of those three things, Twitter really isn't a great place to build an audience. I think Google Plus is great, but you're going to have limited reach. It tends to be a certain type of person goes there. And if your audience isn't there, then you're probably not going to get them to go there. So I tend to go with Facebook. But the other one is I really love Instagram. I do. I think Instagram is fantastic. I get tons of engagement there. But again, you got to make sure that your audience is there. And if you do good work, if you like taking pictures and being able to tell stories with pictures, then Instagram is great. If you're not into that, then there's no reason for you to be there. So based on its fact that it's very robust, dynamic in terms of you can write, you can do pictures, images, video, audio, all that stuff on Facebook, and it has such a huge audience. That would probably be my recommendation.
All
There's
right.
a very long way of just saying Facebook.
Yeah, well, and I would agree. If you're going to choose one for just the flexibility, Facebook kind of has everything you're going to need. The others have their sweet spots and certain types of content that work really well. But for a general purpose social media platform, yeah, I would lean towards Facebook as well.
Yeah.
Our last question comes from a friend of mine named Gary Rowe, and I'll just position this question a little bit as well. In his full-time gig, Gary's actually a hospice chaplain. So, throughout the day, he is ministering to and helping families who have some very sick loved ones. So his question, and again, he's also a published author with a few books. So his question is, at what point is it detrimental to continue to manage your own social media? In other words, it's cutting into writing time. So Gary's a busy guy. He's got limited time to write books, but he also wants to be active on social media. On the one hand, he's thinking about hiring somebody. Is it worth it financially? And if he were to hire somebody, what kind of criteria might he use to find somebody to manage his social media? How would you answer that?
So without knowing Gary's very specific situation, I would say hold out on doing your own as long as you possibly can. As soon as someone else is responsible for it, it loses the you, which is, I'm assuming, why people connect with Gary and read his books are because of him and why they connect on social media. Like, they want to know the guy that writes the content that they enjoy. So what I would do is hold out. Now, that being said, there are lots of tools that can help you be much more efficient. So first thing I would think about is you do not need to respond to social media pings immediately, right? Save it for the last 15 minutes of your day before you check out for the night. Go on and respond to a few people on Twitter, respond to people on Facebook, whatever. Dial down your total social media networks to just what you can manage, right? So if you can only manage Facebook and Twitter and that's it, then just manage those two and let the other platforms, you stop in occasionally, but for the most part, you manage the two platforms or the platform that you can really do that. And then I would think about tools like Buffer to schedule your posts. So maybe the last half hour of your day is social media time. And the first 15 minutes of that are scheduling out some posts for the rest of the day or the rest of the week. And then the next 15 minutes are responding to people. And there's your social media time for the day. You've given it 20 to 30 minutes and you're active. You're giving your community what they want, access to you and insight, but it's not cutting this big gap out of your day. And in that way, I think you can be much more successful. And I would recommend holding out for someone to manage it for you as long as you possibly can.
And I think that's really helpful advice because especially if this is for an individual author, you really can lose that personal connection and that voice if it just becomes more robotic, if somebody just scheduling and sharing things for you. On the tool side, I'm a huge fan of the Buffer app. I use that almost on a daily basis. And with tools, I would say you got to count the cost. You can spend a little money, you can spend no money, you can spend a lot of money. On the low cost side, Buffer is great. Hootsuite is also fairly good. If you want to invest a little bit more, I use Sprout Social as well. That's one of my new favorites, but cost of entry is a bit higher. You're looking at about $60 a month for that. So I don't know if you had any thoughts on other specific tools that you like, Ryan, or any of those platforms. Feel free to jump in and comment.
Yeah, so I've never been able to get a feel for Hootsuite. I know a lot of people have a lot of success with it, and it's nothing against a platform. I personally have never been able to get a feel for it. I've heard very good things about Sprout Social and have used it a little, but have never actually used it personally, but I have heard very good things. I tend to use Buffer. I use the native platforms quite a bit, and I also use a tool called Friends Plus Me, which is a really weird name for a social media tool, but it actually allows you to create and push content into Google Plus and schedule it. And then it auto publishes out to, and allows you to schedule and auto publish out to almost all the other channels. Though your initial publish is into Google Plus, the one thing that actually makes that powerful is that Google Plus posts tend to be very robust. So the other ones are drilled down from that. So you're not actually losing anything in the other platforms by starting in Google Plus. And that's a powerful tool. Now, what you can't do with that tool is share like a link from your website because you're pushing them into Google Plus. So it's something to think about, but it is a nice tool and it connects with Chrome, which is nice. I use a lot of the Chrome extensions to do a lot of my work, Mozbar, the pin it button, a couple other things like that, Buffer. And I really like using Chrome for that as well.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Chrome extensions for what I do on a daily basis too. And for those listening, if you want to check out some of these tools, I'll include links to all the things that we're mentioning in the show notes for this episode. So you can just click through the links to the things that interest you and get to them very easily. I wanted to say thanks to Rod, Sue, Sunday Joe, and Gary for giving us questions for today's interview. They don't know it yet, but I'm actually going to be sending each of them a copy of Ryan's book. So look for that in the mail soon, guys. We'll get that out early next week.
Thank you. That's amazing. And thanks for the questions. I mean, awesome questions. And I hope I didn't dive too deep on any of them because I geek out on this stuff pretty hard. So like, it's hard for me not to want to drop into ones and zeros on you. But those are all really, really great questions.
Yeah, I would agree. Thanks for rolling with those. And it's always fun to bring in real questions from real people. You know, for those of you listening, these 4 folks are friends of mine. They're authors who I've worked with or know personally, and they have real questions. And you know, you may look at some folks and say, well, gosh, that person has a way more established platform than I do. They must have it all figured out. The reality is they have some stuff figured out, but just like me, just like Ryan, we all have questions. We're not experts in everything. So if you don't know, ask. And again, guys, thanks for asking such good questions. Ryan, thanks for answering them. As we begin to close here, Ryan, if listeners want to connect with you, find out more about you, where's the best place for them to go to find you on the web?
Yeah, the best place is ryanhanley.com. You can connect with me on whatever your favorite social platform is. I tend to be spending a lot of time on Facebook these days, but I also like Twitter and Instagram and stuff too. But ryanhanley.com is the best place to find out anything that you need to know over the podcast or blog post, stuff like that.
All right. And again, I'll include links for all of Ryan's social platforms, his website in the show notes for this episode as well. So again, something easy for you to click through if you want to check Ryan out. It's time to bring this episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show to a close. Many thanks to all of you who joined us today for our conversation about content warfare. For more on Ryan, again, you can visit his website, which you'll be able to find at ryanhanley.com. And if you're a marketer or content creator working online, I highly recommend that you pick up a copy of Ryan's book, which is available to order from Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and lots of other places where great books are sold. Ryan, thanks so much for sharing with us today. It's been a great pleasure speaking with you.
Mine too. I thought you were going to say that you kind of recommend my book, which would have been an amazing exit to the show.
Yeah, kind of, sort of, maybe recommend the book. No, it's great. I've enjoyed it. I'm going to read through it a second time and try to figure out some creative ways to apply it to the work I do for Bethany House and Chosen Books, and really looking for some things and tips that I can give to the authors I work with on a daily basis. So it's great content, very easy read and actionable. Folks definitely need to check it out.
Thanks so much, Shaun. And thanks for having me on, man. This is great.
And that's all for this episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion, you can connect with me via email using show@shauntabatt.com. Be sure to follow me on Twitter, where I go by the Twitter handle @stabatt. And if you enjoy the show, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. Until next time, this is your host, Shaun Tabatt, signing off.